Okay, we're supposed to wait for 30 seconds now. So
go now.
Okay. So welcome everybody. This is our day 3 of our HomeStart chats. And I am thrilled to welcome someone who I've never worked with before, but full disclosure is a friend and a fellow mum at school, Marina Fogle. Thank you so much, Marina, for coming and joining us. And it's funny because when I put you on my list of people that I wanted to talk to as part of the HomeStart chats, how do you describe yourself? Will you tell us what you do?
So, Kirstie, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very flattered that I made it on the list. I founded a company called the Bump Class. So we educate antenatal women. We prepare them for the birth of their babies. I was definitely a reluctant mother myself, but I was totally overwhelmed with what an exciting adventure being a mother was. And so with my sister, who's a GP, we started the Bump Class. And then more recently, we have started doing podcasts. It's called The Parenthood. And it's basically lots of conversations around parenting, different aspects of parenting, from sort of preconception through to the teenage years, with different experts looking at different viewpoints. And that's a weekly conversation on a podcast, which gives me a totally unique perspective. So I'm talking about babies and pregnancy quite a lot of the time, but the rest of the time I am also looking at different aspects of parenting, which is great. Love it.
And you have, you're a mother of 3, but you had a bereavement. So you have two children with you still. So you have a huge depth and width of experience yourself. It's not just something that you do for your work. You're on lockdown with Ben Fogle, your husband, who you've never spent this much time with in your entire married life. So that's a very particular lockdown experience, having someone who travels a lot for their work. You're often a single parent. I know you won't mind me saying that because you say it yourself. And suddenly in lockdown, you're very much not a single parent. How is that going?
I think it's definitely quite a challenge. If someone said to me at the beginning of the year, Ben's work's going to stop, your work is going to continue, but not in the way that you usually do it. Your kids aren't going to go to school. I would have found that really quite scary. But actually, it's been really lovely being together as a family. It's been really lovely being with him every night. He just went back to work the day before yesterday, so he spent 2 nights away from us. And Iona, who's 9, was saying literally 10 minutes after he left, I miss Daddy. I'm like, he's coming back the day after tomorrow. I mean, this is barely a blip on the horizon. But it's interesting how quickly they adjust to the norm, and having Daddy and Mummy around the whole time. I'm usually the one that, obviously says goodbye to them at school. Absolutely lovely. I mean, listen, I'm going to be totally honest. I'm sick and tired of cooking 3 meals a day. They get sandwiches for lunch, and that is it. And a lot of the same food, but it's working.
Who knew that children ate so much? Oh, I mean, they eat you out of house and home. So we have so just to explain anyone if this is their first night of tuning in. So the first thing is, the reason that Marina and I are doing this is because we both are very keen to support the work of HomeStart UK. They have a special COVID emergency fund which they're hoping to raise funds for and raise awareness of their work. HomeStart, as many of you know, but just in case you've got anybody tuning in who isn't familiar with them, are an extraordinary charity with volunteers who work to help young families in times of need. And particularly, obviously, at the moment, there are many families who are struggling with lockdown for many different reasons, as we'll discuss in the next hour. But we've got a message from Will Meany, who says hello from Cleveland, Ohio. And we've got Granny Caroline Joan listening tonight. So, Marina, what you were saying about the 3 meals a day, I completely agree with you. I literally am really struggling to be in the least original. And there seems to be a lot of baking going on in our house, which has nothing to do with me and involves industrial quantities of sugar and Nutella.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you there. Although I have been teaching my children to do a bit of the stuff themselves, because I thought this is a good opportunity for them to learn how to mash potatoes, scramble eggs. I can now say, go and put wash on. They know how to do that. They can hoover. It's been a really good opportunity for them to be a bit more hands-on, because, unfortunately, in our normal life, a lot gets done for them. I just don't have the energy to be like, just make your bed, so I'll do it for them. But actually now it's given us this opportunity to all muck together, and we're all working, and I think that's really good. Listen, I think I've got friends whose husbands can't turn a washing machine on, so I'm really proud that in a way my children have learned a few more skills and are much more hands-on and take a much bigger responsibility in terms of sort of day to day.
I had great plans for that at the beginning of lockdown, which slightly faded. And I don't know why. We went for a walk just now. My hair is actually still wet. And the subject of Christmas came up. And the children said, Mum, we spent so much time with you. We're going to spend Christmas with our friends. And I said, darling, that's not how it works. Christmas is a time when everybody spends Christmas with their families, frankly, whether they like it or not. They were like, no. We've been with you all through lockdown. We're going to spend Christmas with our friends. And then we got onto the subject of, I said, well, who's going to, do everything and look after everything? And they came up with a whole list of things that they thought they could do for themselves. And I said, you haven't even progressed to picking up your clothes off the bathroom floor. The fact that you could cater for yourselves and run a Christmas is just laughable. But there's quite a thing between what the children think they're capable of and what they probably are very capable of. But you're right, if you do it for them, they aren't capable of it. Oh, look, we've got a question here from Amy. Our second child was born 2 months ago, and having her and our 4-year-old at home has been chaotic. What do you recommend to help to ensure we give enough time for him, but also try and keep in a routine ready for school? Marina, I think that's probably a question that you'd be brilliant at answering.
I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about a routine for school. I think one of the joys of lockdown is actually being able to kind of go to your own routine right now. And if that's not the school hours, if there is any flexibility there, I would just let it fit in with your newborn. Just try and adapt. And if if the school day usually starts at 9, but actually it's more convenient for it to start earlier or later, then do what works for you. It is, I mean, you can back me up here, Kirstie. Having 2 children, like when the second arrives, it's really full on. It is chaotic in every single household. But I think remembering too that there's so much pressure on us to be perfect, to be the perfect mother all the time. But actually, that's no good for anyone. No one is able to be perfect the whole time. But also, it's not a great thing to teach your children that it is an attainable thing. I'm a really firm believer that our children have to see us mess up. They have to see us get addled and shout and snappy, so that we can then model, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have behaved like that, and apologizing, because that's actually really reassuring for children. If they can understand that they too can mess up, they can say the wrong thing, but they can also apologize and admit when they're wrong. That's a really good thing to do. So I wouldn't worry too much about trying to please all the children all the time. Remember that just by loving them and being there and loving them unconditionally, you are fulfilling the most important things you possibly can do. And when it all goes to pot, which it does for every single parent, it feels much worse for you than it is for them. So I think don't be too harsh on yourself, and don't try and juggle too many balls in the air, and sort of almost welcome that chaos, because it is totally impossible to be in a situation that you're in without a huge amount of chaos. And that's just the way it is.
I think, Marina, I couldn't agree more. What I'd add to Amy's point is that her son won't be starting school until September, and unless he's already in school, but she says trying to keep a routine ready for school. So I presume by that Amy means that her son won't be starting school in September. And I think that we forget sometimes that children, while at times being quite rigid creatures and liking a degree of routine, they are amazingly adaptable. And whatever your routine is throughout the summer with the new baby, it'll be extraordinary how quickly he bounces into the school routine come September or August if you're in Scotland, Amy. Will Meany, who was our person earlier, says, I bought more groceries in the past 3 months than I bought in 30 years. I am I couldn't agree more. They just seem to go through it. I don't understand. Lucy, how can you explain to little ones what is happening and why they can't hug people? Marina, have you addressed that since lockdown?
Yes, and actually talking about coronavirus, I think, is a really important thing to do. A lot of what we talk about on the podcast is conversations around your children, how to talk to them about difficult things, death, sex, all of those kind of things. And I think coronavirus is another one of those that's really important to talk to them about. I talked to a psychiatrist, a pediatric psychiatrist, early on in lockdown, and she said to me, what children will remember about lockdown is not the scary lockdown. They won't remember, the figures of people dying. They'll remember how you have dealt with it as a parent. And it just made me realize that we are in a position of power to be able to interpret, coronavirus crisis in a way that is digestible and not too scary for them. So I'm a big believer in having conversations, even though they're quite difficult with the children, but talking to them in sort of language that they can understand. So, explaining a virus maybe as a character that gets into your body and that can make some people a bit sick, but also reassuring them that it doesn't tend to affect children. But what can we do to be stronger than this virus? And you can explain to them that, it is just not a good time to hug people that you don't know, but soon it will be again. And it's not that they don't want to hug you, it's just that for now it's potentially safer not to. But I think the key is to talk to your children, to open that dialogue. Each child that is told that is going to interpret in a different way and is going to have different questions. So I think the important thing is to make sure that it's not just one conversation. No difficult conversations are just one conversation. It is a series of conversations, but also to try and find a situation in which you can talk to your child, because you can't sit down with your child on the sofa and go, right, we're going to talk about this now, because they will often find that very difficult. Sometimes you're maybe colouring, or you're doing a puzzle, or you're walking somewhere, or you're jumping in a puddle, but it's much easier to have a conversation with somebody if you're not looking directly at them. I always find that when I'm in the car, I have great conversations with my kids because we're looking out the window and we're slightly distracted.
Car conversations, the older they get, the further you can get in a car when you're looking ahead, they're looking ahead, particularly teenagers, and they don't have to, someone once said to me, that gave me that piece of advice about 3 years ago: take every opportunity to drive your child somewhere. It is amazing what you will discover in the car. Now, Marina, we've got questions flooding in, and I really want to answer them because I know that you will have great advice. So I'm going to try and so I've got this little thing on the side, and I'm going to try and move it up and down. But some of the questions, here we are. So that was Amy's question, and then we had Will's question, and then Karen. Now we've got, here we are, a dad. My son is 21 months old, and he is desperate to interact with other children and even other adults. Now his interest is peaking, and he's learning and witnessing social distancing. Do you think this will have a long-term impact on the way he will see socializing as he grows up? And I think that is a fear that a lot of people have, Marina. I'm hearing from all sorts of people who are worried about the impact. And my sister said that someone came to drop off something, a family member, after the baby was born. And my niece, who was previously very, very sociable, little 2.5-year-old, nearly 3, burst into tears when she saw another person because she'd only been with her mum and dad all this time. And what do you think the best way is for us to deal with that side of things?
I think, again, different children will have different reactions. My niece, who's 2 or 3, went back to nursery last week, and having experienced lockdown made her realise how much she loved nursery. She came home and she went, "Mummy, I just love it so much." And so I definitely think there's a spectrum. But I also think children are pretty resilient, pretty robust. And it's about, again, how you deal with it. I would, concentrate on trying to reintroduce people. We do know that there were some statistics published in the paper today, but in the sort of age group of 4 to 15, I mean, there's something, I can't remember what the figures were, but you were more likely to be hit by lightning than get coronavirus.
Oh, yeah.
So I do think that it's really important actually for children, if you're in that age group, to allow them to socialise. Now, obviously, this is, you obviously want to stay within the law, but going out for play dates in parks, I know that children are going around to other people's houses, families are seeing each other. And I think start that slowly, start that reintroduction. There are children that are naturally shy children that find socialisation a little bit hard. And obviously coronavirus is going to hit them a little bit harder, but gently, with people that they get on with, because children, again, they're like us. Some people we just find really easy to hang out with, and some people we just find it a little bit difficult. So don't, be alert to how your child interacts with specific children. Don't force that upon them if they don't really enjoy that interaction, but instead go with them and hang out with the people that they find it easy to hang out with.
It's very interesting. We've got a totally different question here from Catelyn, which is very much one that will be your area of expertise again, Marina. She says, is not being able to see other mums in person affecting the relationships that are usually developed between mums and other mums to be? I mean, I know that so many people get a lot out of those relationships they build up in the run up to having a baby from classes like yours, and then they're not going to those classes in actuality, and then they're not meeting up with their babies necessarily.
Yeah, no, and it's really, really difficult. I mean, we've been running online antenatal classes now for the 3 months. I've had really good feedback, and I definitely see there is definitely interaction in the group. I did a class just this morning, and they were chatting away before we started the class. It was really nice to see how that had formed. But obviously, it takes a little bit more time and energy. And actually, I did an initial class this evening, and I just said, guys, you're just going to need to, if you want a relationship to thrive between you, you are going to have to make a little bit more effort. But actually, again, saying to them, why don't you meet up one-on-one or in a small group? But there's nothing to prevent you from doing that if you are sort of close together. And actually, I sensed that as we were going around the room introducing people, they were all really, really keen to do that. And I think also when you're a mother, I think let me know what you think, Kirstie, but I find that often there's a sort of fast track to a relationship. I've definitely found, my children have been at school for 6 years now, but already within a year, I felt that some of the mums that I'd met at the school had become really, really good friends. And so I think that when you're a parent, you have that shared experience of parenting together and slightly feeling the way in the dark. That friendship is often fast-tracked, so you're really surprised at how intense your friendship emerges, even though you've known each other for a relatively short amount of time.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, when I think about my friends now that I'm closest to, so many of those friends are people, children who are contemporaries. We have a great mutual friend, and the reason we are friends with that couple is because my children started playing with their children at an airport, and then we spent holiday time in the same place. But you're quite right about that. You do, particularly, and I have my 2 sisters, as you know, who are 9 and 14 years younger than me, and I've always said you will be amazed by how your friendship group changes when you have children and when your children start school, because it does become about entertaining the children at the same time as yourself. And if your child is entertained, sometimes it feels like you're 75% of the way to a good day. And so if the mum is someone you get on with as well, then bingo, it's the perfect combination. And I think that probably I would say, and this is just kind of coming into my head now, but obviously one has to be cautious about any advice one gives. I would certainly think that hooking up, if you can choose who to hook up with in a park, meeting up, reaching out to other mums in your school group who you might feel a bit isolated from at the moment because you're not seeing at the school gate, would be a really good start.
Absolutely. And it's about everything in life is about weighing up the risk versus the benefit. And actually, if you're well and you're in an age demographic that COVID doesn't seem to be impacting particularly badly and you're doing it safely, actually the risks of contracting coronavirus versus the benefit you and your family are going to get with that human contact, in my mind, I would feel that is a risk worth taking. Every time you cross the road to go to school, you're taking a risk. Life is full of risk, but I think it is about weighing up what works for you, because we all have, our own situations.
Darcy asked a question, and I think, funny enough, you answered it in your last answer about the antenatal classes. But thank you, Darcy, for your question, and I hope you felt that it was answered in Marina's other answer. Now we've got another a question here from Jade and Ali, and this is one that I know that HomeStart have felt particularly aware of, and I've talked to some of the HomeStart people about this. They say, I know a fair few single parent families who are having to work from home with little ones during the lockdown. They're left working through the night and handling childcare in the day. Any advice? Now, that is such a difficult one because I know you'll have something to say, Marina, but the one thing I know more than any other life lesson is that the only true way to torture yourself is with lack of sleep. Everything is harder when you're tired. Everything is more intense. Everything seems more unmanageable. Everything seems like a higher hurdle.
It is so difficult. And I've got to say, right when this started, it was all very well to feel like us as a family could hunker down. It is a whole different kettle of fish for solo parents.
Yeah.
And you know, all the childcare is heaped on them. I really feel for people in that situation. And also with the juggle of working, you know, if you're a couple, then at least you can hand over and have a little bit of time to, you know, to focus on your work. I mean, I was reading in the paper today, one woman was writing saying, you know, now that schools aren't going to go back until September, I'm going to have to quit my job, which I love. It's a really fulfilling job, but I have a team beneath me. And if my kids aren't going to be going back to school, then there's just no way I can continue this job. And my heart went out to this woman. I think it's probably worth speaking to your employer. We are living through extraordinary times. I know it's such a cliched thing to say, but we also need to be a bit human here. And if I were in that situation and I was really struggling with the childcare and the work, I would speak to my employer and just say, what can I do? Because I love my job and I feel a real commitment to keep on working, but I just don't know what to do with my children. So I'd probably start there and see if there's any compromise that work can make. And I do think that a lot of employers have been really understanding, and I know that there are various government schemes that are making this a little bit easier. The other thing I consider doing is teaming up with someone else. So, is it possible to go with a friend?
I was going to ask about that, Marina, because as I said earlier, I went for a walk just before coming to sit and chat with you. And our local pub is doing takeaway. And I just thought, you know what, I've got my HomeStart chat. I'm going to go to the pub. The children can have takeaway. So we went to the pub. And the landlady said to me, oh, they've just announced that you can be in a pod, that people who are living alone or living singly or in some way vulnerable can. Now, I haven't yet had a chance to go online and find out about that, but it does sound from that as if there is now going to be some way of, you were just saying, pairing up with someone, because that thing of creating your own childcare pod where you can swap back and forward would seem to be a very sensible way of doing it. I also think that you're so right about employers, because I think that everyone at the moment is stepping up to the plate. And I know personally from my experience that I've got some colleagues who are frantically busy at the moment, and other colleagues who unfortunately aren't, people who are furloughed and that kind of thing, who might be really happy to take on some other form of help or responsibility. I know with furloughing it's hard because you can't actually work from your company, but I think you're right. I think in all cases, being honest with an employer and say, I'm struggling, I'm really committed to my job, but I'm not going to struggle in silence. Now, Lou has said, I can vouch for the lack of sleep. It's hard to balance everything anyway, let alone without sleep. And I think that one of the things that's really important for HomeStart is that they work with so many families who don't have family or friends nearby who can help. They work with people who are isolated and people who are vulnerable, and often the arrival of a second or third child in their home, or a child with learning difficulties or other, illness or disability has really pushed them to the limits of what they're capable of. And I think that when we talk about single parent families struggling COVID, that's one of the reasons that I'm so keen to support HomeStart. And I would just say to anybody who's watching this chat, you're watching it on YouTube. The Just Giving page is below, and all the details are there. And this is exactly the kind of thing that HomeStart does help people with.
Yeah, Kirstie, I'm also aware that, that our two options that we gave aren't necessarily available to people. One thing that I know that a lot of babysitting companies are offering free babysitting for people who are in need. So I was talking to the CEO of Bubble, which is an online babysitter company, and they were offering free childcare for key workers. But I know that, if you contacted them as a single parent and explained your situation, there are so many companies that are really willing to help. There are so many students who aren't working right now who are saying, I would love to give my time and volunteer and help someone who's really affected by this. So I think asking for help is actually quite an important one. It's difficult sometimes to do, but approaching a local babysitting company, maybe, where we live, we have a village WhatsApp. And at the beginning of lockdown, we had a guy who was like, I'm back from university, if anyone needs any help with schoolwork. But just trying to get in touch with those communities and seeing if there are any volunteers that will be, potentially available to come. Because, in the first week of lockdown, weren't there something like 500,000 volunteers at the NHS?
Yes.
And actually, I know so many people who volunteered and they didn't get any work. They're desperate to do something.
So there are people. Now, we've just had a really interesting question here. And I want to tell a story, a very personal story, but it says here, some new babies aren't getting their normal health visitor developmental checks at the moment. Do you have any advice and reassurance for parents who are worried about this? Now, I want to say something. My niece basically inhaled a piece of carrot recently. She's a little 2.5-year-old. She was walking down a lane on her way to feed a local pony with a piece of carrot. She took a bite out of the piece of carrot. It just went down the wrong way. My brother-in-law took her to hospital, and she was then transferred to another hospital and kept in overnight for observation. And they thought they were going to have to go in and it was in her lung. And in fact, she coughed it up in the night and it was fine. But one thing that was really stressed by the hospital when he went in was, thank God you brought her in. So many people aren't bringing their children in because they're afraid of COVID. Worrying things are happening because people are worried about what could happen in a hospital. And I really would plead to anyone out there, if they have any doubts about their children's health, any emergency situation with their child, do not hesitate. Because as you've said, frankly, what you're worried about is likely to be a far more danger to your child than COVID is. And but the developmental checks, as far as the developmental checks go, what are parents supposed to do about that?
So as far as I know, you are still meant to take your baby to see the doctor. So normally babies go and see the doctor at 6 weeks, and then they start with their vaccinations at 8 weeks, 12 weeks and 16 weeks. And I know that these are really, really important. GPs are wanting to see your babies for vaccinations. Please don't be worried about exposing your baby to coronavirus as opposed to getting vaccinations. Vaccinations are incredibly important and kind of never more important than today. I think that when you've got a newborn baby, you will be visited by the midwife. Now, usually you'll get 3 visits. I know that is being cut down. They will do 1 visit because they need to do the heel prick test. But then usually the other 2 visits are remotely. It is amazing how well doctors can consult remotely. My sister's a GP and she says, I realised I can look down people's throats, into people's ears. It is actually amazing how much I can use from a remote conversation. But the other thing that's really important, I think, is often to look at the baby's weight. So very often you'll go into the GP practice and they'll weigh your baby. Now, ideally, you don't want to be doing that too often. But if you go and buy some baby scales, then you can weigh your baby at home. Please don't get too obsessed about weighing your baby more than you would if you were going to go and take them to the GP practice. But it means that when you're having a consultation remotely, you can weigh the baby and they can see that they're gaining weight. And this is really only important in the early days of having a baby, because they do want to see that your baby is gaining weight. But I know you can get baby scales pretty inexpensively, and I think that's probably a worthwhile investment. But please don't be afraid of going to see your doctor. GPs will always prioritise new babies, and they shouldn't be missing out on any important developmental checks at all. I really don't think so.
Josh says, thank you, Vivian, for that question, by the way. And thank you to everyone who's sending us in questions, because it's fantastic. Josh says, my partner is due to give birth to my parents' first grandchild. That's quite a way of putting it. How do we ensure that they miss as little as possible? Now, interestingly, the next question that's from Nat is along a similar line. So I'm going to read Nat's question out as well, which is, how can I get breastfeeding support in the early days? Obviously, if we weren't in lockdown, my mum would come over and help. Now, I know that you, Marina, will address the breastfeeding question, but both of those questions, it seems to me, are about grandparents being able to see grandchildren. Now, I would urge everyone to make sure that they're aware of the latest advice on lockdown, because things have altered and you are allowed to see people. And I know that it's interesting to note that when we were filming here, the protocol was that everyone had to self-isolate before coming here for 7 days. And then they came here and we were all in one unit, everyone having self-isolated for 7 days. So I think probably if there's someone who's really important to you when you're having a baby, or someone whose help you really need, then it's really important to not assume you can't see that person, to really find out what the latest advice is. It's really important not to do anything that would break lockdown. But my experience is that people are making assumptions based on what the lockdown was, not necessarily based on what the lockdown is now. And it does change all the time.
Absolutely.
The breastfeeding question is one for you, Marina.
I think with regards to breastfeeding, because also women are spending much less time in hospital after they're giving birth, after they've given birth. And usually we recommend that after a straightforward birth, women, even though they might be offered a discharge after 6 hours, they should stay in for a night, because actually you've never fed your baby, you've never fed a baby before, never breastfed a baby before, baby's never done it before. It can sometimes take a little bit of time just to get that confidence there. But again, remotely there is a lot of support. So we've actually been doing quite a lot of breastfeeding support online, which in a way actually works really well, because when you're unable to feed or you're having struggles with breastfeeding, you want to see someone, not tomorrow, not the next day. You need to see someone now, because it is so painful and so frustrating and so agonizing when you can't feed your child. So I would look for resources online, and I know that there are some. I had one girl who said, feels a bit odd to get your breasts out in front of the computer, but once you get your head around that, it's actually amazing how much people can help you. So have a look at resources online. I know that Geraldine Miskin, who teaches our classes, has a lot of YouTube videos and does a lot of kind of online support and sort of free coaching sessions. So having a look at that. But I know also on the NHS website, there are a huge amount of resources online. And okay, ideally someone would come and support you there and then. But actually, if it means you have immediate support, then doing it remotely actually isn't a bad option.
I remember breastfeeding the first time being incredibly difficult. I'd had a cesarean and I had this enormous 11-pound, 11-ounce baby, and I just didn't think it was humanly possible to, to feed him. And in the end, actually, I went with mixed feeding, which really worked very, very well. And years later, I met someone who was a breast cancer doctor, and there's a history of breast cancer in my family, and I said, I know that it's a good idea to feed for 6 months. I wasn't able to do that, and he said, actually, it doesn't matter whether you're feeding 100% or just feeding a bit. It's good to go on feeding as long as you can. And I just thought to myself, I wish someone had said that to me at the time, because I actually could have done that and that would have been fine. So I always think it's really important with breastfeeding is to know that it's a benefit to you as well as your baby, But at the same time, that overwhelming guilt that people feel when they can't succeed with it is just sometimes the most appalling burden. And if I was in lockdown with a new baby and struggling with the breastfeeding and thinking that failure to breastfeed would be detrimental to my baby, I'd be in a real pickle. And I think that it's really important. So many things with a baby, and I know, Marina, you all know, you know this so much, are exacerbated by worry. You know, we worry ourselves into a problem. And now this is a very interesting question. Susan from Leicester says, do you feel that being stressed during pregnancy is going to adversely affect the baby? I would say, before Marina says something, which I know she will have a lot to say on this, I'll tell you one thing. Susan, I had appalling morning sickness the second time. Absolutely dreadful, the type that the Duchy of Cambridge has, which means you're hospitalised and then you're fully in bed. Hyperemesis is what it's called, and it's just appalling. And I once said to the doctor, it can't be good for my baby, this. It can't be good for my baby. And he just said, trust me, babies suck everything out of you that they want. It's very rare that you can do something. You know, your baby is take. And I find that hugely reassuring, that it's sort of an alien being that just takes what it wants and doesn't really worry about you at all.
Yeah, well, doctors often describe babies as parasites. You know, if the mother's not eating properly, you know, her hair will start to fall out, her skin will get sallow, she'll feel awful. The baby will be fine. Broadly speaking, I'm not saying it's okay not to eat well, but listen, you know, they've done quite a lot of studies into kind of how stress affects the your growing baby, and definitely in an ideal world you're not stressed. But I think we all know that we don't live in an ideal world. So my advice to you would be, try and do what you can to relax. So maybe you're doing mindfulness at the beginning of the day, maybe you're doing walking or continuing to exercise, maybe you're doing some psychotherapy, but what you can do to sort of reduce the stress, and actually there is quite a lot you can do, but also bearing in mind that babies have been born into way more stressful situations than we're experiencing now. You know, there are babies born in war zones where, you know, there were babies born in concentration camps. So, you know, these babies have survived and have grown up and they've been okay. So I think as parents, we are very mindful that we want to do the very best we can for our newborn babies. So try and do what you can to reduce your stress. But also don't get stressed about being stressed, because that's just exacerbating the problem when you don't really need to. I did a really interesting podcast with the most wonderful psychiatrist called Catherine Hollins, and she talked about the importance of the first 1,000 days of a baby's life and how that is the most important part of their life. And that starts from conception through to when they're 2. And she talked about taking time to acknowledge your baby. And if you have a chance, listen to that podcast. I wish I chatted to her when I was pregnant with my children, because it made sense on so many different levels. So I think listening to things like that and empowering yourself that, you know, even though you're pregnant during really quite a stressful time, there are ways to manage it, and this natural stress that you're feeling is probably less damaging than you might be worried about.
Now we've got a question here, Marina, from Rachel, and this is a question which is particularly relevant to the work that HomeStart do, because they often work with isolated and vulnerable families, and the volunteers obviously come from the area, and sometimes a family, because of the work perhaps of a partner, or because of dislocation, because of loss of a job or separation, or military families. HomeStart do a lot of work with military families, which is amazing. Anyway, what Rachel says is, I'm new to the area and I don't know anyone yet. I'm worried if I have to self-isolate and can't go out to buy essentials like nappies, etc. I mean, the first thing I say, Rachel, is do get in touch with your local HomeStart, and that would be a great place to start. I don't know. Again, it's very difficult because we are all talking about the importance of track and trace. Everybody knows that that's how we can get out of this, and that's what we're being told. But I think that does hold a bit of a sort of sword over all our heads, because as we come out of lockdown, we face the prospect of getting a text or getting a call which asks us to self-isolate for 14 days. And that is a really worrying thing. And I think that any organisation that can help families, any contact you can have with someone who, if you get that call and someone's asking you to self-isolate because you've been exposed to someone with coronavirus, it is a good idea. So again, as I've said before, the reason that Marina and I are having this chat, well, it's actually a real treat for me to see Marina and have a chat about all our favourite subjects, is because we both feel that HomeStart as an organisation can really help people, and particularly new mums and young, mums of young kids. So the Just Giving is at the bottom of the page, and it would be great, if you're enjoying this chat and taking part in it, whether you could give a donation. But I think Rachel's question is very important. Isolation can be a problem for new mums, can't it?
It can, but I also think, weirdly, I've seen communities come together. I've seen people get to know the people they've been living next to for a decade, because we're all so busy with our everyday lives that suddenly local WhatsApp groups have been set up. People standing outside and clapping the NHS on a Thursday evening have suddenly started engaging with the people in their street. So actually, in a way, I think that this is an opportunity for people to get to know their community. I know that certainly from my experience, as soon as lockdown was starting, text went around saying, what can we do for people? If anyone needs me to go to the supermarket to get you stuff or to go and get medication. And those offers had never been there before. So I think they find helping people really empowering. And I think that you will probably be surprised at how strong the community is. And if you asked for help, and if they knew you were on your own, and they knew you were worried about the situation and the worry about self-isolating, I think you would be probably quite overwhelmed with the amount of help and kindness out there. And that in itself is just such a great thing to feel.
Earlier on, when we were chatting before we went live, Marina, you were saying that in many ways, for some new mums, you have felt the lockdown has been beneficial.
Yes, it's bizarre to say that, because obviously it's not easy, and especially at the beginning when pregnant women were deemed as sort of high risk and were meant to be shielding. But I do think one of the biggest challenges I have is persuading people to slow down, both at the end of their pregnancy and then after their babies are born. I just feel that there's a lot of pressure on women to keep on working, to keep on socializing, and then as soon as the baby's born, to be up and out and in their clothes and in the dress and pushing their new buggy out on the street and seeing their friends. And there's a huge amount of pressure. If you actually look at most cultures in the rest of the world, new mothers hunker down for 1, 2, sometimes even 3 months, and they have this wonderful time where they're just looked after by the community, and they don't have to cook, and they don't have to think about housekeeping. They just get to look after their baby, get to know them, work out feeding. And I think for many people, having that enforced lockdown has forced people to do that. And when I talk to women who've given birth, I'm noticing in the last few months that the sort of anxiety and the feeling of it's all too much, which I see a lot, and then mood disorders that go hand in hand with that, seem to be much less, because I just think there's less social pressure on people to get out and about. And I hope that will have a long-term impact. I hope society will make it more acceptable for people just to hunker down and spend some time doing nothing, because that has such value for our health and our baby's health. So, obviously, there's worry and there is isolation, but for many women, I know this has weirdly been a sort of weird blessing.
Now, this is a question which you've also addressed when we've chatted before. It's really key, because there's a lot of rumours and things going around which just aren't true. Christina has asked, some of my friends are saying that my husband might not be allowed in the hospital with me. This is scaring me. Is this true?
So it's very difficult to say what is true, because the practice within different hospitals is changing day by day and between different hospitals. Each hospital is their own trust and they have a degree of autonomy. But I have not heard of one incident where the father is not, or a partner is not allowed to be there at the birth. There was an article in a paper, I remember right at the beginning of lockdown, saying partners aren't allowed to be there for the birth of their child. They're not allowed on the antenatal ward. They're not allowed on the postnatal ward. They were forgetting the crucial thing is that the place where you give birth is the labour ward, and partners were allowed on the labour ward. They just weren't allowed in the antenatal ward. It's when you go to where you need to be looked after before your baby is born, i.e. before labour has started, or the postnatal ward where you stay for a day or a few days afterwards. So that generally has not been a problem because women are being discharged a lot more quickly. I know it is difficult for women that have to stay in hospital for longer periods of time, but please don't worry about that. The people who are making these decisions know how important it is for a woman to have a birth partner there. If you ask any midwife or any doctor, they are passionate about the importance of that, and they will do all they can to ensure that is possible. But obviously their priority is to keep mothers and babies safe, and also them safe. If the whole of the maternity ward is struck down with coronavirus and there's no midwives and doctors there to ensure your baby's delivered safely, that's no good either. But in order to make you feel a bit more confident, I have not heard of one situation where a partner hasn't been allowed to be there.
I have, as I said, my sister had a baby, new baby on the 25th of April, and her husband was allowed to be there. He was allowed to be there for 12 hours. He wasn't allowed to come back once he'd left, but he was allowed to be there for 12 hours.
I do think the important thing is that midwives are trying to keep everyone safe. And I think if you approach them with understanding and respect and politeness, rather than taking frustration and anger and anxiety out on them, you are in a stronger position. So if you go in and you say, listen, I totally understand, you're doing an amazing thing and we really respect that you're going on to work, you're a key worker, you're keeping us all safe. Is there any way? Then I'd say that you're a slightly stronger position. Because again, it is a slightly case-by-case basis. And I did hear of one hospital where parents were flouting the rules because they said, fine, partners can stay, but once you're in the hospital, you stay in the hospital and don't leave and then come back. And people were doing that. And so at one point they said, right, if you don't start obeying the rules, then we're going to have to say no to every single partner. So I think as long as you do abide by the rules and you treat them respect and the dignity that they deserve, then you're much more likely to be kind of happy and kind of get that important thing.
So unbelievably, Marina, at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to have to wrap this up. But we have got, we've just gone so fast. So Sarah says thank you, and I just want to say thank you to her for watching this and everyone else out there who has tuned in. This is our third day of the At Homes with HomeStart, and we're really getting into our stride. And by the time, it'll come to the end of the week, and then, and we've got one here which says, Mr. and Mrs. Frith. Now, this is a very interesting question, and it's funnily enough one that you slightly answered before, but I know you've got views on this, Marina. It says, do you think social media has put pressure on parents to be perfect, particularly during lockdown? We see families doing fun homeschooling projects, baking together when most feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really, really difficult. I think, social media can be amazing, but it can also be really difficult to interpret. And I think what you've got to remember is that social media is like an advert. No one ever thinks the Bisto family actually operate like that. It is just, it is a window dressing. And I think it's really important for us to realize that, because I think it's also really important for us to teach our children that. Our children are going to be growing up, in a world much more influenced by social media than even we are. And I think it's really important that we have a healthy relationship with social media and a healthy understanding about how much it really matters, so that we can pass that on to our children. So I think social media does need to be taken with a pinch of salt. My view with social media is that I only follow accounts that make me feel happy and feel good about myself. And invariably, there are people, maybe we work in a similar business, and I see their accounts and I think, oh, why haven't I been asked to do that? And the moment I get that little pang of envy or jealousy or feeling that I'm inadequate, I just stop following them, because ultimately I can do that. It's so easy. It's just a simple unfollow. So I think if you have that idea that, social media can be brilliant, but maybe you don't follow your friends because actually following them and seeing their great lives doesn't make you feel good about yourself, but you think, I love architecture, or I love flowers, or I love adventure. So I'll follow, accounts that make, that cultivate that interest. then do that. But also, I've got lots of friends who just say, you know what, social media is not for me. And there's so many difficult things in life that you can't switch off. Social media is one of them. So use that button to switch it off if it's not making you feel good.
Yeah, I've got loads of friends who do that from time to time, and some who've never got into it and some who got into it and switched off. Marina, I can't thank you enough for doing this. It's really a treat. It's a treat to see you. I haven't seen you since January. So it's really nice. I knew you'd be a brilliant person for this. Thank you for saying yes. It was a real kindness. It will be really interesting to see because Ben's gone back to work and he's gone back to filming, and I had a pang of jealousy when you said that, because I'm quite keen to get back to work too, and I'll be completely honest. I felt bad when friends of mine have said, I've loved being with the children. I've thought, oh God, I must be a rotten mother, because I've loved being with the children too, but equally I'm quite keen to get back to work. And I tell you, the kids are really keen to get rid of me. So I think that, as you say, we can all, put on a perfect parade, but it isn't always like that. And to all of you who have tuned in, if you think you need HomeStart's help, if you think you can help HomeStart either by volunteering your time or by donating your money, many charities come to me and say, will you get involved? Will you help? But I've rarely come across an organisation where every pound you give really gets used. It goes further, does more, helps more. And I can't tell you how grateful I am for everyone's donations, but also for I can really say that it's a worthwhile spend, if that's not a wrong thing to say. But it's and if you want to visit the HomeStart website, which is rather a joy, they've got the most lovely pictures, the most lovely stories. And the great thing about HomeStart is it's regional. So you can find your regional HomeStart. So wherever you are in the country, you will have a local HomeStart that you can get in touch with. So have a look at the website and find out more about the work. And again, Marina, I can't thank you enough. You've been brilliant. You've been absolutely fantastic, reassuring, sensible, calm, realistic, absolutely fantastic. So I'm going
to Kirstie, it's so nice to have a conversation with someone who's not my husband or child.
Well, listen, night everyone, and love to everyone in your family.
That's a pleasure.
Bye.